Dude, you have the home gang. And we're gonna wipe here. There's nothing more I can do. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind, featuring yet another varied set of Mentor Roulettes. Although, once again, I will remind that this took place a few weeks before the final Dawntrail relic step got players into all the Dawntrail content. That said, for DD1, we were a 21-minute replacement on M8N, Arcadion's Howling Blade, as Viper, and we were but one of 4 replacements, as apparently this party had wiped 4 times. We never learned how that happened, but it did, apparently. Now, you'd think, probably, that this would mean that this would be crazy difficult, but with nearly half the raid replaced with community, and also probably the wipes teaching the team something, there wasn't much that stood out in this one. We had a few deaths, including a moment where the red mage got combo killed, and also where we were down to 1 healer, but nothing close to a wipe happened. A tip of Vipers is that with a boss that moves around as much as Howling Blade here, saving some coils for those sections is probably a good idea. Additionally, remember that the Reawaken combo and Uncoiled Fury have AoE components, so they both work particularly well on the add phase. For duty 2, we went to Yuweyawata field station as Bard, and overall the duty went fine, but something went dreadfully wrong on the second boss. For the first Free Spirits cast, the healer just dies immediately from overlapping AoEs. Once things settled down, I use a Phoinix down, but the warrior did too. Things look fine again initially, but then we get to Lost Hope, and, well, the tank demonstrates they don't seem to have any idea of how to navigate this, and the healer is also having issues. Here's a tip for that. The cursor only rotates while you are not moving, so by rapidly tapping forward, a little bit harder on the controller I believe, you can slow down the speed at which it rotates, and simply hold the button once you're moving in the correct direction. Another tip is that if you recognize that you will not make it to the edge of the arena, remember that not making it means certain death, while slogging through all the goop only means maybe death. So if all else fails, just run out there! A last tip is that tanks can invuln the hit. Sev, the samurai, decided to rest a tank, which would have been much more effective if the warriors still had their Phoinix down. Now, I think this is an interesting time to mention that while Yuweyawata field station is soloable, synced by a warrior even, that doesn't mean that it is easy to do that, or that just about anyone could do it. And also, things happen. On the second attempt, things went a lot better and we cleared the rest of the duty no problem. For duty 3, we went to Inside the Glove as Monk. Oh boy, so much 1-2-3 combo. For duty 4, we went to Titan Extreme, and more than half of the raid was community, although it seems neither healer was. On the first pull, things are looking pretty okay until we hit the final phase and the adds spawn in. The adds die pretty far apart, taking up a lot of space with the goop they leave behind. And due to some awkward positioning, a sudden tank buster takes out half the raid. And just in time for the healer to raise the other healer, they slide off due to upheaval. And extremely suddenly we're down to 2 tanks and a healer alive. And when they finally get their co-healer up, they go down again to Weight of the Land. And in a desperate attempt to do something, the just newly raised healer uses Limit Break 1, with little to no result. And from there, the rest falls apart due to the explosions. For the second attempt, in the second phase, one of the healers slide off the arena due to upheaval. But then we hit the final phase with everyone alive. Ilana handles the adds perfectly, so we have more room to dodge this time. As we hit the final 25% of the fight, everyone is still alive, which is a good sign. But then we learn that, I guess, the healers, or at least TV among them, does not know how jails work, or how to deal with them, as they run up and corner me, causing them to get tethered for a boost in defense. Both jails are still broken in time, but due to the focus on the jails, both a healer and Agent Monica fly off from upheaval. Thankfully, we can quickly finish up the fight from here, but that really goes to show how sometimes a mechanic might work just fine with a player or two that has no idea how to deal with it, simply because it didn't line up in a way where that would be a problem. Still, well done, team! For duty 5, we went to Labyrinth of the Ancients, and this went well right up until the final boss where we had one of those moments where Ancient Flare wipes the raid. Now, if you've done Labyrinth of the Ancients enough times, you have almost certainly seen this happen. Sometimes, beating the Ancient Flare cast is trivial. Other times, you make it by a hair. Why there can be such a huge difference is that while there are some parties that can burst so hard that you can beat the Ancient Flare cast even at the worst possible timing, the average Alliance raid simply cannot. And the way it works is that Phlegethon starts casting Ancient Flare once he has finished whatever it is he was doing. Once he has passed certain HP thresholds, of course. And I do believe the second threshold is 10% HP remaining. So some parties have it easy because he was busy and so starts casting it at like 2% HP remaining instead. And some parties, like this one, don't make it because he started casting it at like 9.8%. Very cool, thanks for that. Of course, on the run back, he starts to cast at like 1% HP. For DD6, we went to Ramuh Extreme as Reaper. For the first pull, we very quickly discover that the Sprout tank has no clue what's going on. We managed to reach into the ad phase due to Paddy being quick on their feet with extending their debuff in time. But then we have an unfortunate overlap with Fierce into the ad phase, and then the AoEs just take out too many players, and the remaining tanks and healers simply cannot handle both the orbs and recovery and the overcharging all at once with Fierce, and we wipe. For the second pull, with a death here and there, we do make it to the final phase, but then we run into an issue where NT already had the buff from 3 orbs, but instead grabs 3 more before provoking, which also meant they were late, leading to Paddy going down. Paddy gets rest, but provokes in a hurry, leading them to die almost immediately, as apparently the Tank Buster still hits through invuln when you have the buff in hand. The more you know. As NT's buff eventually expires, total chaos erupts, and Paddy does manage to get back on their feet with a buff to take over tanking, but the damage was already done. And because so few players were still alive, we got the cursed both healers feared scenario, and once they were finally out of it, they also had to deal with the Rolling Thunder, making it difficult to heal. The tanks start to get into a bit of a rhythm of rotating tanking, and the healers try to recover, but each time they rest someone else seems to die in the same fell swoop, culminating in the one remaining healer getting feared and killed. We also had a moment where one of the healers in their desperation hit heal LB when it was still an LB2, but I'm not even sure if he would have been able to survive to an LB3 with what remained. For pull 3, we had 2 deaths into both healers dead due to an unfortunately handled fear during the ad phase. On pull 4, as we get into the ad phase, NT puts themselves in an awkward situation with gradually building up to 3 red stacks, forcing Paddy to sort of wait to realign the tank switching. But due to the gradual climb up, the healers probably already spent a lot of resources on this. Right as the ad phase ends, Agent Monica dies due to NT leading too far away from the designated tanking spot. Simultaneously, NT ends up extending their debuff again, and Paddy has had enough of this and takes over anyway. As we get into the final phase, we are super low on orb count, so we have to wait for orbs to handle Rolling Thunder. And then, as orbs are needed for a tank switch, they are actively spawning in. On the plus side, that means the circle AoEs do very little damage. On the minus, that's really scary. Although, it is possible, if NT was a bit faster, that we could have handled it without a death. But at least we got the tank switch right after Paddy goes down. And then the next Rolling Thunder happens and we have to stand in line for orbs again, which is made a lot worse because one of the Thunder players die, making it bounce to a new player. Thankfully, we managed to get it fixed right after. Unfortunately, both healers are running dry on resources to the degree that the expectation of resing the bard that went down starts to sound quite demanding, but do it we must. The next Rolling Thunder conveniently happens targeting Paddy as they need to tank switch anyway. We also hit an orb count where Agent Monica grabbing 3 orbs was perfectly fine. Unfortunately, the fears overlapped just so that Paddy was feared, leading to NT's death, and momentarily Shaxx too due to the fear. At the same time, Paddy almost instantly dies from the sudden damage, and while we did get NT back on their feet, both healers are completely out of resources now. So, thankfully, Ramuh is also dead. Well done, team. For DD7, we went to Rathalos Extreme as Dark Knight. In phase 1, we had an unfortunate double hit taking Shaq out. Going into phase 2, Shaq also forgot to make sure to top everyone up before the healing debuff applied. Hopefully, it doesn't come back to bite us. Super early in phase 2, our Viper gets double tapped to death, so now we're down to the last life. A neat trick you can do to protect your team as a more confident player is to deliberately position yourself to aim Rathalos away from everyone else, in between actions, so that if he targets you, he isn't threatening anyone else. Next, the stack marker goes on Shaq, and afterwards he, doesn't issue it. Remember that the dot from the fire does a ton of damage, and that Rathalos can take out a DPS from like 80 or 90% HP with a single swing, so the moment you have a free GCD as a healer, you should prioritize getting rid of any dots in the fight, so hopefully let everyone's potions last longer. Not to mention, drinking a potion costs more than a GCD, and the healer's attack GCDs are probably not that valuable over a DPS GCD. We somehow make it through the fight, but the sheer amount of times we were hanging out right next to wiping without doing so is incredible. For duty 8, we went to P3N, Everything Burns! Or Pandæmonium's Phoinix as Red Mage. And this went extremely well. A funny thing about Red Mage at level 90 is that due to a weird potency oversight, maybe? Jolt 3 does more damage than the Fire and the Stone, and long story short, the one mana they generate more than Jolt is only situationally actually better. I have a video where I discuss this in more detail, link in the description. The advice I would give is that the potency difference is small enough that if you really prefer to keep the muscle memory right, do as you like. But most of the time, unless you're in a hard duty where you need to know the exact optimal sequence, most of the time, simply using Jolt 3 because it does more damage tends to be better, as it is unlikely those single mana points from Fire and Stone will lead to more melee combos that if you hadn't used them. I actually initially forgot about this at the start of the duty, but when someone reminded me, I switched around. For duty 9, we went to Mistwake as White Mage. A funny, simple trick to optimize your damage output in a dungeon as White Mage is to try and make sure as many lilies are spent outside of combat as possible, meaning in an AoE pull you spend lilies before the pull to prepare Misery and then only spend extra lilies if you're about to hit 3 again, or obviously if someone needs the healing. Also, remember to actually use Divine Benison and Aquaveil to reduce the healing the tank needs. There are of course plenty of other options, but these two are the classics I feel White Mages tend to forget. Of course, this run went super well, but I do think it is worth briefly talking about the first boss. If your party is good and does solid damage, then this likely won't be an issue, but I did want to mention, for anyone that needs to hear it, that unlike perhaps certain other bosses, if all the rocks are deleted by lightning, you will not receive a new rock to hide behind. So this boss technically has an out-to-lose scenario. A hard enrage? No, but if you goof it up too hard, you just might lose due to mechanics. The boss is soloable, and the lightning circles appear to deliberately miss specific rocks all the time. So as long as you don't break those, you're fine. For duty 10, we went to Buckman, with Buckman as a Buckmanomina, bringing Buckman Ruin. For duty 11, we went to Vanaspati. I feel the final boss is particularly interesting in this duty. First, a fun fact. I don't know if it was ever resolved, but there used to be a bug where the screen indicator showing which color on the floor is going to explode would simply not show for some players. Possibly graphics related issue. This was particularly silly because it is a visual so clear that if you ever run into someone who says they can't see it, they probably can't see it because it isn't there. The second thing is the crumbling sky intermission. Of course, you have plenty of time to move and you can survive one, but the meteors themselves have exactly 2 patterns, leaving the safe spots as either mid-left, mid-right, far left, or mid-right, mid-left, far right. Simultaneously, the circle AoEs that accompany them also have basically only 2 patterns, meaning that if you start on the middle tiles 1 row back from where the boss is, you simply dodge into the first safe spot, second safe spot, and then perform like a chess knight move over to the corner and you're good. Our team also did well, but near the end our healer died due to getting knocked back into the edge while not dodging the exploding line, but thankfully I had a swift cast ready. And finally for duty 12, we went to Tower of Babil as Dragoon. Again, we actually had something weird happen on the second boss. So, the boss has two especially unique mechanics. The first one is Downpour, where you get a stacking debuff until you die or until you turn into a frog. Turning into a frog removes the slowing effect and clears the debuff. However, you cannot attack as a frog. The trick is to take note of how many stacks is lethal, and then briefly turn into a frog just before hitting that stack count, instead of frantically turning immediately. Unfortunately, our healer hung out at the wrong platform, and instead made themselves tiny and then died. Our tank used a Phoinix down and we kept going. The other distinct mechanic is the Magitech Chakram, where you have to become tiny to dodge the line AoEs. Now, you could do a similar thing of turning tiny just before the chakrams land and going big again in between, but at least from my observations, the damage lost from becoming tiny is like at most 10%, if even that. So if it costs you damage to move back and forth a bunch, maybe just become tiny at the start and big again at the end. Another pretty balanced set, still with some extremes. It is a bit awkward though, because I do think I need 15 duties a week to reach 2000 before Evercold. That being said, we have now passed 16/19ths on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, among the AR extremes, Ramuh is possibly the most likely for a new player to randomly bash their head into. Only a few main quests after fighting Ramuh hard, the extreme version will be accessible, and where some extremes are handed out in weird locations, like the Waking Sands, Ramuh's one is found right at the Twin Adders in Gridania, so the probability of finding it and taking the quest by quote-unquote accident is extremely high.